Peter's my favorite disciple, and probably most of ours, because things just come out of Peter's mouth that are wondrous and frightening all at the same time. So here's Jesus and the disciples. They're in the north country. They're in Caesarea Philippi. Not to be confused with Caesarea down there on the Mediterranean that Herod had built. I've been there. Well, there's the ruins of it. Huge theater, beautiful harbor, well it was in its day. An aqueduct to bring in fresh water. It was a beautiful city. Philip, his son, not to be outdone, decided he would build a city in honor of Caesar up in the north country on the hills of Mount Hebron. And so it's known as Philip's Caesarea, or Caesarea Philippi. For the Galileans, this was the place of authority. The place from which the kingdom was administered. So Matthew has this center point of his gospel take place on the outskirts. I picture them, sitting around a little fire and just outside of town. And Jesus says, what are people saying about me? Who is the Son of Man? Son of Man is a term that came out of apocalyptic writings, things about the future times. It's messianic. Jesus uses that title specifically to evoke those kinds of responses from his disciples. The one that says lapel mic, if you could just slide it down just a little bit, I got a little bit of feedback. I think that's off, yeah, I'm sure it's way over there to the right, says lapel mic, and you can just turn that down just a little bit, because I'm getting a little bit of feedback, and that's kind of, oh, that's much better. Okay, thank you. What are people saying? It's come to that point in his ministry where, what's the buzz? That's a line from Jesus Christ Superstar. What's the buzz? Tell me what's happening. That's that scene. Just had that flashback. Some say you're John, the baptizer, come back to life. Some say Elisha, prophet to kings. Some say Jeremiah or one of the other prophets. In other words, we know that there's something special about you. You're not just your run-of-the-mill rabbi. We're not quite sure what it is yet. At least the people aren't sure. But they know there's something special here. And Jesus says, well, what do you say? And Peter, now love him. Peter says, you're Messiah. Now, it's a stretch to get there. And Jesus recognizes that. You didn't pick that up from anybody else. How did you figure that one out? You're Messiah. Now, unfortunately, because we weren't raised Jewish, sometimes we don't have a real good understanding of just what that means. McCann in his lectures this week, he said, we say Jesus Christ. Oh, and by the way, the only difference between Messiah and Christ is one's Hebrew and the other's Greek. It's the same thing, just in different languages. Messiah in the Hebrew, Christos in the Greek, it's the same, just different language. It's like Father and Padre. It's the same thing, just in different language. But Messiah Messiah was something special, something that was long anticipated within the Jewish culture, within the Jewish framework. If we read 96th Psalm, the 98th Psalm, Isaiah 2, Isaiah 56, Isaiah 52, they're all those servant songs, and as we go on through the next few weeks, we'll be looking at some of those as well. All these images of who Messiah was to be. Messiah was to be the one who brought justice. Now, I say that, and immediately we think of, justice, courtrooms and lawyers and prison and all that kind of stuff. Justice in that Hebrew sense, really, that Hebrew really means to make right, to make just, to make fair. It doesn't really have a punitive sense unless you're on, the exploiter end of it. But justice, and you remember if you can recall the song that Mary sang about the infant still in her womb. He's the one that will bring the low up and bring the high down and set the prisoner free, make the sick well. It's to bring justice, to make things right. The Messiah would be the one that would make things right, that would seek justice, and the one who would bring righteousness, right living, and right being. We seek that all the time. I know, because of what I see, I hear people reminisce about the days when, when I was a kid, I don't know about you, we never locked our doors. We could get on our bikes, ride all over town, see you home for supper, Mom. Don't we long for those days? That's the same kind of longing that the people of Israel had. That someday Messiah would come and everything would be made right. All those who were oppressors would be cast away. Those who had been oppressed would be lifted up. The poor would be made wealthy. The wealthy would be made poor. All those reverses. Now, in later days, long after Isaiah and the Psalm writers, during the Maccabean time, the image of Messiah also started to take on those militaristic ideas of being a king who would lead Israel to conquer their enemies. And so, certainly, when Peter says, "You are Messiah," not only is there the image of the suffering servant from Isaiah, not only is there image of the one who reestablishes the throne of David from the Psalms, but there's also that image of the Maccabees of the one who will lead us to victory. All that is going on, even for a who knows how well-educated fisherman. They still went to synagogue. They still knew the story. You can't live in Peter's day as a Jew and celebrate Passover every year and tell the story every year without some of it sinking in somewhere. He was aware of what he was saying. And probably, more of the thinking in his head and the other disciples was that this was the one that was going to lead us to victory over Rome, to reestablish the kingdom of David on earth. But that wasn't the way it was going to be. This kingdom that he gives Peter the keys to, the keys of grace and justice and honor and loyalty and charity and love and faith. Thank you, Judy. All those keys. The main key is the belief that Jesus is Messiah. That opens all the doors. That opens the kingdom. As we talk more about the kingdom as we go on, I do want to make one caveat that as we talked about it this week at pastor school, kingdom is not a term most theologians are using anymore because it's kind of militaristic. They're using kingdom, without the G, to denote more of a family, or commonwealth. That the relationship we have is something that we share. It's a commonwealth. So, what do you think about those images? Because, you know, quite frankly, as Americans, we're not so big on kings and kingdoms anyway. You know, we got rid of that a couple hundred years ago. Or, you know, so maybe we better think about it in terms of a commonwealth or a kingdom. Jesus lets Peter know that because Jesus is Messiah and because they recognize that, they now can live in the kingdom. That the kingdom is now. That the kingdom is ushered in through Jesus. Now, I know we often talk about, you know, going to heaven someday and being in the kingdom of God. And that's true. And that knowledge, that assurance that we will live in the kingdom is what gives us the ability, the courage to live in the kingdom now. And living in the kingdom is not easy. As we spend the next several weeks together going through these texts of Matthew about the kingdom, we will discover that while it's glorious to live in the kingdom, it's also challenging. And while there are great benefits to living like we are in the kingdom, there are also drawbacks. Because it makes us do things sometimes we don't want to do. When it's all said and done, what God offers us through Christ is the ability to live in two worlds at the same time. To live in the world, the physical world that we live in, and to live in the spiritual world of the kingdom. And intermix those two. It's not like they're separate, because we live that spiritual life in the physical realm. But we can do it. We have been given the keys to open that door. But it takes courage to open the door. They were really excited, I'm sure, because Jesus was Messiah. Party time. And Jesus made it clear to his disciples that it was now necessary for him to go to Jerusalem and submit to an ordeal of suffering at the hands of the religious leaders and be killed.